18 years after she was last seen, Ellabeth Lodermeier's purse was found hidden along the banks of the Big Sioux River. A tired farmer taking a break under the shade of a tree next to the water noticed a small, dark bag in a little dugout in the ground. Curious, he retrieved the bag, and when he opened it, one of the first things he pulled out was a checkbook with Ellabeth's name written across the top. Immediately, he knew that he had discovered something big. Ellabeth Lodermeier was the name of a young woman who had gone missing under strange and suspicious circumstances nearly 2 decades earlier. Seemingly interrupted mid-dinner, Ellabeth vanished with only this purse and her coat, and she was never seen again. For 2 decades, there had been basically no clues as to Ellabeth's whereabouts. No leads, no sightings, nothing except for a few credit cards that had been found 600 miles away in Canada. How had those credit cards gotten there, separated from her purse, which had been hidden in the ground back in Sioux Falls? Police believe that someone took those cards and planted them there to interfere with the investigation and distract detectives. Someone with access to Ellabeth's things. Someone who knew where she was. Someone that knew what had happened to Ellabeth Lodermeier. Ellabeth Lodermeier was last seen by her husband at her home on North Indiana Avenue in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in the early evening hours of March 6, 1974. The couple was estranged and no longer living together. Ellabeth's new boyfriend, Jerry Thomas, also lived in Sioux Falls, but was out of town on the day she disappeared. They had plans to talk on the phone that evening. Jerry told her that he would call between 9 and 9:30. But when he did, Ellabeth didn't pick up. She had been renting only the first floor of the house, which apparently shared a phone line with the renter up on the second floor. Jerry called 3 times that night, but each time the upstairs tenant answered the phone. The next day, Ellabeth didn't show up for work. She was a good employee and passionate about her job at the Sioux Falls Community Services office. It was abnormal for her not to call if, for some reason, she couldn't come in. When her coworkers couldn't reach her, they called her husband. Jean Lodermeier and Ellabeth's coworkers went to her home. Ellabeth's car was in the driveway, and her front door was locked, though they did manage to get in somehow. It's not clear if Jean had a spare key or if they broke in, but what they found was a strange scene. There was a loaf of bread rising on the kitchen counter, and flour spilled on the floor. Additionally, there was a pizza in the kitchen with just one piece missing. Some reports state that the pizza was also on the floor. Everything else, however, was in its place. The only things missing were Ellabeth's coat, purse, and Ellabeth. Known affectionately as Ellie to her friends and family, 25-year-old Ellabeth Lodermeier was described by those that knew her as patient and caring. Her boyfriend, Jerry, called her fun and easy to talk to. Born in Billings, Montana, the youngest of 4 children, Ellabeth moved with her family to Aberdeen, South Dakota, where she graduated high school and attended Northern State University. Ellabeth met Jean in Aberdeen, and they married in January of 1970 when she was 21. She wore a long, white veil secured to a crown trimmed with pearls, and the couple honeymooned in Omaha, Nebraska before coming home to Sioux Falls, where Jean had gotten a job working construction. Northern State University in Aberdeen was a 3-hour drive from Sioux Falls and their new home, but Ellabeth wasn't about to let a little distance keep her from her education. In fact, in pursuit of a degree, she transferred to Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, 6 hours from Sioux Falls. Ellabeth's classes were a source of contention in her marriage. Her family later reported that Jean would occasionally disable her car so that Ellabeth couldn't drive to school. He was emotionally and physically abusive, but it didn't stop Ellabeth from pursuing her dreams of helping others. She graduated in 1972 with a bachelor's degree in social work. The following year, she filed for divorce. Ellabeth's family had never really approved of Jean. The former Boy Scout had been arrested for burglary 2 years before their wedding in 1968. He had led police on a high-speed chase that ended only when officers shot out the back tires of his car, and he was sentenced to a year in prison. Ellabeth's niece, Chris Jacobson, called Jean a master manipulator. In an interview with Argus leader writer Katie Nelson, she said that it was unfortunate that Ellie got sucked into the relationship. Quote, "She always thought maybe she could change him." Chris called Ellie not herself when she was around Jean. No longer carefree or relaxed, Ellabeth was tense and rigid. Her family called Jean prone to anger, controlling, and abusive. Jean would later testify that there had been no abuse. However, under oath during a deposition for the divorce, Ellabeth stated that Jean had beaten her. Court filings show that he had once attacked her with her own shoe. No one believed that Ellie would just up and leave. She had worked hard for her degree and was excited about her relationship with Jerry. The same day that Ellabeth filed for divorce from her abusive husband, she went out with friends to celebrate her upcoming freedom at the Pomp Room, a local club in downtown Sioux Falls. There, that night, she met Jerry Thomas. They fell for each other almost instantly and started dating. Even though they hadn't been together long and Ellabeth's divorce had not yet been finalized, the two were already imagining a future together. They had looked at homes. Jerry was in love. When Ellabeth's coworkers called him on March 7, 1974, and told him that Ellabeth was missing, he was 175 miles away in Redfield, South Dakota, where he grew up. Worried, Jerry immediately returned to Sioux Falls and went to the police, who gave him a polygraph exam, confirmed his alibi, and officially cleared him of suspicion in her case. Jerry was relieved to be cleared, but terrified for Ellabeth. While there were no clear signs of a struggle, the strange condition of her home had investigators immediately concerned about foul play, and they asked that citizens living in rural areas check any abandoned barns or secluded spots that may conceal a body. But no one reported anything. Even though she had initiated divorce proceedings, when her picture appeared in the paper, she was identified as Mrs. Jean V. Lodermeier. Coworkers helped to raise $1,200 for information about her whereabouts, but no one came forward with any helpful news. Publicly, police announced that they were still searching for Ellabeth and that they had no suspects. But behind the scenes, they were already looking at Ellabeth's husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, Jean. Jean had been the last person to see her, and Ellabeth had disappeared just 3 weeks before the divorce case was set to go to trial, one where she had already gone on record stating that he had hurt her. Additionally, Jean had indicated deception during his lie detector test with police, but authorities didn't feel that there was enough evidence to charge Jean with anything. And as days and weeks passed, police and her family came to believe that Ellabeth was never coming home and that she had been murdered. But there was no body and no murder weapon. So the police waited and kept an eye on Jean. He was constantly finding himself in trouble. That June, only 3 months after Ellabeth's disappearance, Jean was shot following a scuffle in the front yard of his house. He told authorities that he had been followed home and accosted by a stranger who had first thrust the barrel of a handgun into his stomach. After a brief struggle, Jean had been shot in the left hand, and the assailant quickly fled. Jean was treated at the hospital and released, but the shooter was never seen again. In September, 6 months since anyone had seen her, 3 of Ellabeth's credit cards were found in a woman's restroom at a Canadian National Railway station in Dauphin, Manitoba, Canada. But despite a thorough search, authorities found no additional clues or signs that Ellabeth had actually been there. The station is a nearly 10-hour drive north of Sioux Falls, and detectives speculated that someone else put the cards there in an attempt to distract the investigators. Sioux Falls detective Pat Mertes said, quote, "It seems they were planted there on purpose, with the intention to throw the investigation off." That first year, authorities executed several search warrants and interviewed everyone associated with Ellabeth: her family, her friends, her coworkers, and ex-boyfriends. But no one led them to her. Sioux Falls police detective Henry Lupke later recalled, quote, "It was a big blank. No useful information came up." As time passed, investigators kept coming back to Gene. In 1975, the year after Ellabeth's disappearance, he was arrested for shoplifting at a drugstore called Lewis Drug. And the following year, he was caught breaking windows at several Lewis Drug locations. The year after that, one of the officers that had apprehended him, Sergeant Al Fields, discovered a pipe bomb in his car. He was never charged, but Gene was a top suspect in the incident. Then, in February of 1978, nearly 4 years after Ellabeth had disappeared, Gene filed a lawsuit against the city of Sioux Falls. His suit claimed that 6 police officers had gone beyond the routine of a normal investigation to the point of harassment in violation of his constitutional rights. At the time it was originally filed, Gene sought $1.75 million in damages, though by the time it went to trial, the amount had been reduced to just $100,000, which still would have been a lot of money for the city in the 1970s. At trial, witnesses testified that Gene had been followed by police and that patrol cars were seen frequently passing his home in the 6 years since Ellabeth's mysterious disappearance. Gene claimed that he had been interrogated for 21 hours without food, sleep, or access to a phone. He said that his criticism of their investigation had put a target on his back and that he had spent 9.5 days in jail without being charged with a crime. Additionally, Gene said that police had told associates of his that he had killed his wife, despite there being no evidence to support it. All of which, if true, does sound excessive. But the jury deliberated for less than an hour and a half before clearing the officers of all charges. Gene's lawyer said that they would appeal the ruling, but they did not. 8 years after the failed lawsuit in 1988, Gene was arrested for grand theft and accused of stealing several Bobcat loaders and a John Deere tractor. He claimed that the construction equipment had been abandoned in one of his rental properties and that one of his employees had actually been the one to remove them from the site. During a pre-trial bond hearing, authorities revealed that Gene was suspected of trying to procure a hitman for Sioux Falls police detective Russell Prince. Gene's lawyer, John Schlemgen, said that Gene had intended to hire an investigator for his grand theft case, but the state's key witness, Eugene Cummings, testified that Gene had come to him first looking to pay for perjured testimony for his upcoming trial, and that talk had eventually turned to hiring a hitman. Mr. Cummings said that Gene told him about owning explosives and about making someone named Prince disappear. Detective Prince was another one of the investigators that had testified against Gene during his window-breaking trial. Lewis Drug had sought $70,000 in damages, but the case was settled with Gene owing only $1,834, which kind of seems like a win to me, but Gene must not have seen it that way. The potential threat to police meant that Gene lost his bond hearing and was required to remain in jail until the grand theft trial, which he also lost. At his sentencing, Judge Hurd said, "This defendant has no remorse. The only remorse he has is that he got caught again." End quote. Judge Hurd sentenced Gene to 45 years in prison, but even from prison, Gene could not be silenced. In a letter that he wrote to the governor of South Dakota and printed in the Worthington, Minnesota Globe, Gene claimed that law enforcement had become obsessed with locking him up for, quote, any crime they could make stick, and that the grand theft conviction had been a conspiracy. Gene wrote that the employee actually responsible for the theft, a Dean E. Johnson, had been Detective Prince's nephew, and that when Gene fired him, Dean had apparently told him that he would frame Gene for the theft with the help of his uncle, Detective Prince. Gene lamented that evidence that supported this was not allowed to be presented in court, which was further proof of conspiracy against him by the judge, R.D. Hurd. In 1991, Gene and his parents filed 2 lawsuits against a long list of defendants. This list included the city of Sioux Falls, the police department, the state of South Dakota, both the past and current state's county attorney generals, as well as several specific police officers and journalists from various news stations and newspapers. The suit claimed that the defendants had conspired to maliciously prosecute Gene and sully their reputation. Gene wanted a new trial, and they asked for $10.5 million for the violation of their civil rights. But in March of 1992, the South Dakota Supreme Court announced that they would uphold Gene's conviction. Just 1 month later, in late April, 18 years after her disappearance, a farmer who had been looking for calves that wandered off took a break to lay in the shade along the banks of this river. While he lay there, he looked over and saw a bag tucked into a hole. Inside was Ellabeth's purse, wallet, and checkbook. The actual location where these items were discovered is east of here, further out of town. It's private property, and there's no trail or anything like that. It's more remote, and no doubt was even more isolated back in the 90s and the 70s for sure. Police were intrigued by this discovery, calling it unusual, and an immediate search of the area was conducted. They sifted through soil, searched in the river, and combed through the grasses for evidence, but turned up no additional signs of Ellabeth or her body. Even after all that time, the purse and its contents were in pretty good condition, but authorities didn't believe that they had been placed there recently. Captain Bill Hoyer, Sioux Falls Police Department's head of detectives, told media that the items had been likely concealed for some time and recently surfaced by an animal or human. There's no mention as to whether or not the items were dusted for prints. Whoever planted the credit cards that were found in Canada had to have gone into Ellabeth's wallet before hiding it. But if fingerprints were found and compared to a suspect, then police have kept that information to themselves. More years passed, with no more clues as to Ellabeth's location. Gene continued to express his opinions about law enforcement from prison, and a letter published in the local paper speculated that the investigation into Ellabeth's disappearance was flawed due to a Sioux Falls police detective who had associated with Ellabeth at work and after hours. The letter also alleges that substantial evidence shows that this police officer was directly involved in her disappearance, though it does not even allude to what that evidence might be. Gene was paroled in 2002 after serving 13 years of his 45-year sentence. He never remarried and died of natural causes at the age of 66. Sioux Falls Police Detective Pat Mertis said that while many people have been investigated over the years, Gene remains the #1 person of interest. Quote, he was never able to be 100% cleared. Detective Mertis was assigned the case in 2015, 2 years after Gene's death. He gave a press conference that resulted in a number of new tips and leads to follow up on, but nothing has resulted in the discovery of Ellabeth's whereabouts. In 2019, a new tip brought investigators back to the banks of the Big Sioux River. Local news station Kelloland reported that Gene would occasionally visit the site where Ellabeth's purse was eventually recovered. Gene would visit the location with his girlfriend, but leave his girlfriend in the car while he disappeared on foot into the woodland. Could he have been visiting the site of Ellabeth's body? The Sioux Falls Police Department brought in cadaver dogs. Jojo and Rocky from Samaritan Detection Dogs indicated 2 areas of interest marked in these photos in red. Crews were brought in to dig up the earth and sift through it, looking for evidence again. Ellabeth's family was invited to observe, and they waited patiently while groups of people worked through the piles of dirt, but nothing pertaining to Ellabeth was found. Detective Mertes hasn't given up on the location, though. He said, quote, "We will obviously explore that site some more. Hopefully do some more exploratory digging. Hopefully bring in some more resources. It's a very rough terrain, so things such as ground-penetrating radar aren't really an option." End quote. Investigators are looking into other locations too, though they haven't divulged where any of those locations may be. At the time of her disappearance, Ellabeth Lodermeier was 5 feet tall and 105 pounds, with green eyes and long brown hair. She was wearing blue jeans, a blue shirt, and a lightweight blue peacoat. Anyone with information on Ellabeth's disappearance is asked to contact the Sioux Falls Police Department or Crime Stoppers.